You're just here to carry drinks, not correct billion-dollar contracts." The words hit like a slap across the conference room table. The billionaire's voice, smooth for investors but sharp as glass for staff, cut through the clink of crystal glasses. Alana steadied the silver tray in her hands. 6 champagne flutes trembled ever so slightly, catching the glint of the chandelier above. She lowered her eyes, the practiced invisibility of a waitress masking the fire behind them. Around her, the room hummed with self-importance. The city's top financiers, lawyers, and executives leaned back in leather chairs, while their pens scratched across thick merger binders. The deal was worth $100 million, numbers so large they floated in the air like a language meant only for kings. But Alana understood them. Every line, every formula, every trap. The men laughed as Charles, the billionaire leading the merger, boasted about his strategy. His cufflinks caught the light each time he gestured, his voice dripping with arrogance. "This merger is bulletproof," he declared. "We've locked down the formula. EBITDA, EBIT, it's all the same in the end." Alana froze mid-step. No, it wasn't the same. Her eyes flicked to the projection screen where the formula was scrawled across in thick black ink. EBIT times 1.5 equals valuation. Her chest tightened. That was wrong, fatally wrong. To them, she was no more than a servant balancing glass. To her, that misplaced acronym was a wrecking ball waiting to shatter a $100 million empire. She wanted to speak. She wanted to place the tray on the table and point to the formula. But the words of her supervisor echoed in her head. "Don't talk to them, don't interrupt, just smile." So she smiled. The investors chuckled, sipping champagne, while the interpreter at the far end shuffled papers nervously. He was supposed to translate the terms into Mandarin for the Chinese delegation, but he stumbled over the words, his hesitation growing obvious. Alana's pulse raced. She knew the exact phrasing. She had written it once before in the margins of her old finance notebooks from a life she never spoke about. She bit her tongue. Not here, not yet. Charles laughed again, clinking his glass. "Gentlemen, this is how you turn a company into gold. Easy math, easy win." The interpreter muttered something haltingly in Mandarin. The delegates frowned. One leaned toward another, whispering sharply. Confusion spread like a ripple across the polished table. Alana's grip on the tray tightened. One wrong word, one wrong symbol. This entire deal could collapse in front of her eyes, and she was the only one in the room who saw it. She slipped back to the corner, setting the tray down on a side table. Her reflection in the mirrored wall stared back. Uniform crisp but plain, hair tied back, nothing to suggest she could be anything but the help. But in her pocket, folded small, was the same notebook she carried on every shift. Inside it, scribbles of formulas, Mandarin phrases, little fragments of the world she once belonged to. The world she lost when her mother fell ill and tuition money turned into hospital bills. Now she balanced glasses, not balance sheets. Yet here it was again. The world she left colliding with the world that mocked her. Would you endure this? Watching arrogance destroy a deal you could save while the room told you to stay silent. She swallowed hard. For now, she stayed quiet. But the tray, still resting in the corner, gleamed under the chandelier like it was waiting for the moment when balance would no longer mean carrying drinks, but carrying truth. The shift before the meeting always felt like a dress rehearsal for someone else's life. Alana pressed her palm to the swinging kitchen door, letting the thrum of the conference room fade into the steam and clang of the back of house. Here, where garlic hissed on pans and dishwater thundered into steel sinks, the hierarchy loosened. Everyone moved fast, spoke louder, and looked you in the eye. "Hey, numbers," Diego grinned from the espresso station, tamping grounds with a flourish. "Got your puzzle?" Alana lifted the corner of her apron to reveal the small spiral notebook tucked into the waistband. "Always?" Diego slid a macchiato across to her. "For the princess of prime numbers." She laughed softly and pulled the notebook free. The first page was a mosaic of symbols. Sigma, Sigma, Delta, neatly printed beside Mandarin characters she'd copied and recited so many times the strokes lived in her wrist. Beneath them, she had written a phrase 3 times. Yingyu Qian Luran not equal to Yingli Nangli. Profit before surplus does not equal profitability. Not exactly relevant to tonight, until someone pretended it did. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote, EBIT not equal to EBITDA, then, beneath it in Mandarin, Zishui Qian Luran Bu Dengyu Zishui Jeju Jiiteng Seo Qian Luran. She underlined the second line twice, slow, firm. Language had a way of shrinking or expanding the truth, and the wrong acronym was a trapdoor disguised as carpet. Charles is in there talking like he invented calculators, Diego said, craning toward the porthole window in the door. Any good? Flash, she murmured. Not substance. Diego whistled. You hear everything. I carry drinks, she said, and rooms talk to glasses. On the prep counter, her silver tray waited, polished, ringed with a thin napkin collar to keep condensation from turning the surface into ice. She placed 8 coins on one rim, then one by one moved them toward the center until the tray balanced perfectly on 2 fingers. The trick wasn't strength, it was center of mass, a fraction off and gravity tattled. Still don't get how you do that, Diego said. She nudged a coin a millimeter. The tray wobbled, then steadied. Small adjustments. In the corner, the TV over the staff fridge murmured with muted news, images of red ticker tape and graphs spiking and dropping like heart monitors. Alana's gaze lingered. There had been a time when she dreamed of a desk under one of those screens, wearing a jacket with sharp shoulders and a lanyard that led her through every door. 3 years of high honors in international finance, 1 semester into her master's. Then her mother's voice had turned thin on the phone, then the hospital wristband, then the spreadsheet of expenses that didn't care about dreams. She took the night shift. Then 2. The scholarship committee sent a regretfully worded email. The bursar sent an invoice. She paid what she could, deferred what she couldn't, and told herself there would be a bridge back later. Later kept moving. Alana, called Kira, the floor manager, popping through the door like a cork. You're station 1 for the boardroom. Smile. Don't speak unless spoken to. We're not here to be interesting. I know, Alana said politely, even though she didn't need the reminder. Kira hovered, eyes flicking to the notebook. Careful with that little diary. Last thing we need is, what did you call it? Commentary. It's just notes, Alana said, tucking it away. Good, because those men think notes are for them. Kira cleared her throat. And keep an eye on the interpreter. He looked green. Alana nodded, the word interpreter clicking into other words. Indemnity, valuation, control premium, like magnets snapping into a shape she recognized too well. She thought of the hours in the university library with Lin, her roommate from Beijing, practicing tones between chapters of corporate law. They'd built a private language of margin notes, loose Mandarin and tighter math to keep their minds awake. Xioxin, Lin would scribble, be careful next to any clause that could bite later. Everything okay? Diego asked after Kira left. She let the truth rise and fall with a breath. They're trying to buy certainty with swagger. Those exchanges usually cost double, he snorted. Tell them that. I like my job, she said, though the grin that accompanied it didn't quite reach her eyes. On the corkboard above the staff time clock, a laminated sheet hung titled Employee Skills Declaration, New HR Pilot. It had 2 lines, languages and certifications. The rest was blank, a token afterthought printed with the same gray ink used for meal breaks and overtime rules. Alana had filled it out once, Mandarin, conversational, French, reading, and watched nobody read it. She washed her hands, tied her apron tighter, and lifted the tray. The weight settled where it always did, just below her left palm, a small invitation to trust balance more than fear. She pushed through the door, the kitchen's warmth surrendering to the boardroom's refrigerated air. The room had morphed while she was gone. The laughter had gotten louder, the interpreter paler, the Chinese delegation more still, a stillness that wasn't calm but alert containment. A junior analyst in an expensive suit was explaining the valuation slide with the confident cadence of someone who had never been wrong in public. He tapped the wrong acronym like a metronome. EBIT, EBIT, EBIT. Alana glided to the head of the table, topped off glasses, and offered a tight smile when Charles leaned back and said, See, even our staff runs like clockwork. Her tray slid past the interpreter's elbow. His hand shook as he pushed his glasses up. Beneath his binder, Alana glimpsed a draft of the contract translation. One line, half covered by his sleeve, showed a term that made her scalp prickle, Juisu Xing Peichong retroactive indemnity. The Mandarin was fine. The context, with EBIT, was not. Together they formed a lever that could pry open liability the way a crowbar pries open a door. She swallowed. Her tongue carried the Mandarin explanation like a bird carrying a twig light, sure, one motion away from building a bridge. But the room did not want bridges from her. It wanted a quiet river to float its boats. "Refill," she murmured to a delegate. He gave a polite nod. His cuff brushed her wrist, and for a second his eyes flashed with surprise, as if something in her gaze betrayed an equation where he expected emptiness. "Miss," Charles said without looking at her, "keep the bubbles plentiful and the noise minimal." "Yes, sir." His arrogance peeled memory loose. She was back in a chalk-scented seminar room, Professor Jallo drawing a clean line between valuation and price. Warning, language turns numbers into weapons when you're not careful. Alana had stayed after class to ask about a footnote tying EBITDA to cross-border tax treatments. The professor had smiled. "You have a mouth for nuance," he'd said, meaning it as a compliment. She'd carried that line for days like a small candle. Now she watched smoke creep toward the ceiling and call itself confidence. A soft chime from the far end of the table drew attention. The lead delegate checked his phone, then exchanged a glance with his colleague. There it was again, the measured stillness. In Mandarin, they spoke quietly, a handful of characters threaded with caution. "Gongxi Kuo, the formula is wrong." The interpreter blanched. He translated a safer sentence instead. "There, requesting clarification on inputs." Alana felt the tray tilt microscopically. She shifted her wrist to steady it, and the motion sent a ripple through her spine, a body remembering that balance is active, not passive. She turned to the window. The skyline glowed, all glass and ambition. Her reflection looked back at her, a woman in a simple uniform, hair pulled into a clean knot, the thin chain at her throat catching a sliver of light. She thought of her mother's whisper on the last good day, "Don't let them tell you who you are." And the bills had told her instead. Diego slipped through the door with a basket of warm brioche and winked. The wink said, "I see you." It helped. Alana set the bread down, then, unable to resist, she nudged her notebook to the edge of her apron pocket so that a sliver showed. A private act of defiance, barely a millimeter tall. At the far end, the junior analyst launched into a digression about synergies. The word had the sloppy shine of buzzwords used to fill silence while money turned nervous. Alana's eyes traced the whiteboard where the formula sat like a dare. She imagined drawing a single slash, a single added DA, a single sentence in Mandarin that would anchor the numbers where they belonged. She could feel the marker in her hand, smell the solvent of the ink, hear the small squeak of honesty written large. Her fingers tightened against the tray. The coins inside her head slid toward center. Someone laughed at a joke that wasn't funny. Someone else checked a watch. The interpreter dabbed his upper lip with a napkin. The lead delegate's stillness turned to stone. Alana exhaled through her nose and let the breath count to 5. She had learned this too, the math of breath. 5 in. 5 held. 5 out. The body's little algorithm for staying when everything moves. Her phone, set to silent, buzzed once in her apron pocket. A text from her landlord reminding about the rent increase. Life had a way of choosing its moments like a heckler. She took another breath. Would you endure this, being dismissed by men who couldn't see the cliff they'd built, while knowing you could move the ledge with a single word? She returned to the corner with her tray as if to polish a glass. In reality, she traced with her finger on the cloth, EBITDA, then below it the Mandarin characters for the same. Her fingertip left nothing visible, but she felt the letters settle like coordinates. The door opened. Kira's head appeared. 10 minutes to toast, she whispered. Then signatures. Signatures. Ink turning posture into prison. Alana looked at the interpreter, at the whiteboard, at the little gap between almost and too late. The tray felt heavier now, not because the glasses were full, but because it held a choice. Every object has a purpose, she thought. Maybe this one had 2 to carry, and then to be set down. She lifted it again and stepped toward the table, where arrogance and error held hands across $100 million. Outside the window, the city kept breathing. Inside Alana's chest, something braced, not to shout, not to storm, but to speak with the precision of numbers and the courtesy of a language that deserved better than to be used as a trick. 10 minutes, Kira had said. Sometimes the longest equation is the space between knowing and acting. The chandelier hummed with its own electric tension as if even the light knew something was wrong. Charles, in his silk tie and smugness, pointed to the whiteboard again. Simple. EBIT multiplied by 1.5, that's your valuation. Clean, efficient, guaranteed. The interpreter repeated the phrase, but hesitation cracked his rhythm. He swallowed hard, translated into Mandarin, and chose the wrong word. Gongshi Kuo. The lead delegate's brows knit together. He whispered to his partner. Alana, standing 3 steps behind with her tray, caught the word clearly. The formula is wrong. Her stomach sank. Charles didn't notice. He kept laughing, pouring charm across the room like cheap cologne. The investors tittered politely. The interpreter dabbed his forehead with a napkin, struggling to keep up. The tray in Alana's hand shifted slightly, glasses trembling. She pressed her thumb against the rim to steady it. Inside her, a different kind of tremor began, a recognition so sharp it cut through the years of silence. She remembered her old seminar room at the university, chalk dust in the air, when Professor Jallo warned, a single misstep in valuation isn't just an error, it's a weapon. This was that weapon. Sitting on the table, smiling in their faces, waiting for signatures to make it permanent. The interpreter stammered again, fumbling with Zishui Qian Luran, profit before tax. He skipped the next words entirely. He didn't say Zishui Qian Luran, depreciation and amortization. Her mind filled in the missing pieces automatically, the way a musician fills in a silent note. EBIT not equal to EBITDA. It was as if the whiteboard itself shouted the mistake at her. She shifted her weight, almost stepping forward. Almost. But then she caught sight of Kira, the floor manager, hovering at the back of the room with her arms crossed. One look, sharp as scissors, screamed, "Don't you dare!" Alana's throat tightened. She was the only one in the room who truly understood what had just been lost in translation. But if she spoke, she'd be fired before the words left her lips. Still, the tray felt heavier by the second. The glasses clinked like accusing voices. The lead delegate leaned back, whispering in Mandarin again, "They don't know their own numbers. Dangerous." Alana's heart hammered. She whispered the translation under her breath, soundless. "They don't know their own numbers." No one heard her, but she heard herself. And for the first time, the silence in her chest felt unbearable. She slipped the tray onto the side table, flexing her aching wrist. The reflection in the polished surface showed a woman in a uniform, yes, but also a woman with eyes that saw what billionaires could not. The interpreter coughed into his sleeve, clearly out of his depth. Charles barked at him, "Just tell them it's airtight. Tell them it's foolproof." Foolproof. The word stung like irony. The delegates glanced at one another. Their pens hovered above their papers but didn't move. Suspicion hung in the air like fog. Alana exhaled slowly. She touched her apron pocket where the little notebook pressed against her hip. Inside it, her scrawled reminder waited, EBIT not equal to EBITDA. The truth was already written. All that was left was to decide whether she would let it remain in a notebook or let it be heard. Her hand hovered at her side, fingers twitching like they were ready to trace the missing letters into the air. But she didn't move. Not yet, because timing was everything. And the silence in the room was growing louder by the second. The interpreter's voice thinned to a thread. "Valuation is a EBIT times 1.5, he managed, then reached for water with a trembling hand. The glass clicked against his teeth. He tried again, now slower, as if stretching syllables could turn them true. "It is same as EBITDA." A beat of silence. From the delegation side, Miss Zhang, gray suit, pen poised like a metronome, lifted her eyes. "Bushy," she said, crisp and even. "No." Her colleague leaned in, murmuring, "Tamen ba EBIT dangshang EBITDA." "They're treating EBIT like EBITDA." The interpreter hesitated, then fumbled a softer version into English. "They request clarification." Alana felt the silver tray tilt in her palm. She shifted a fingertip, 1 coin's worth of pressure, and the wobble steadied. Tiny adjustments or the whole thing comes down. Charles, unbothered, rolled his shoulders into a practiced grin. "Of course, clarify away." He flicked his laser pointer like a baton. "As I said, these inputs are interchangeable in practical terms." Interchangeable. She tasted the word like ash. 2 chairs down, a junior analyst, barely older than Alana when she'd sat in lecture halls, tapped his Mont Blanc against a printed deck. "We modeled conservative," he insisted to the room, too loud. "If anything, EBIT keeps us disciplined." Miss Zhang's pen stopped. A quiet that wasn't deference filled her side of the table. It was the quiet of trained patience. Alana set her tray on the credenza and crossed to the carafe, giving herself the cover of movement. As she poured, she angled her body toward the interpreter. Low, without looking at him, she spoke in Mandarin, precise, respectful, the way Lin had drilled into her. Nai yingai yang EBITDA. Zishui jeju jai tengxiao qian luran. You should use EBITDA. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. His eyes flicked to her, startled, then to Charles, then back to his notes. He swallowed. They want assurance we have, considered depreciation. Assurance. Miss Zhang said in English now, voice flat. Not assurance, accuracy. The junior analyst breathed a laugh, the condescending kind. We have entire teams for accuracy. Kira caught Alana's eye from the doorway. Don't. But it was already too late for pretending not to hear a building creak. Alana's notebook pressed against her hip like a heartbeat. She slid it free beneath the lip of the credenza, opened to a blank page, and wrote in print that looked like power when written big. EBITDA equals EBIT plus D plus. She added the Mandarin below, careful strokes. Zishui jeju jai tengxiao qian luran. Then, smaller, the landmine, Yuisu Xing Peichong plus EBIT equals Fengxian retroactive indemnity plus EBIT equals hazard. She tore the page cleanly, folded it into a narrow strip, and drifted, just another server making rounds, past the junior analyst. As she set down a fresh water, she placed the strip beside his deck, her motion so seamless it looked like napkin placement. He saw it. He smirked. He turned the strip over without reading, as if even paper from her hand carried the wrong kind of ink. Then, to prove his point to no one, he slid it under his leather portfolio with 2 dismissive fingers. The strip disappeared. Her jaw tightened. On the delegation side, pens hovered again. Miss Zhang's gaze traveled the whiteboard like a surgeon surveying a scan. Kingwen, she said calmly, Naiman de Guzhai Jichu de Odishi Shanemi, may I ask, what precisely is the basis of your valuation? The interpreter started, stumbled on the first syllable. They ask our fundamental basis. Charles didn't miss a beat. Our basis, he said, is strength, earnings, momentum. Not a basis, Miss Zhang replied, switching to English so there'd be no refuge in translation. A slogan. That landed. A few U.S. investors shifted in their seats. The junior analyst's pen stopped tapping. Alana poured champagne for a man who wasn't thirsty. The bubbles rose in orderly strings, little ladders even air knows how to climb. She set the bottle down, eyes on the sequence. When people lie with numbers, the air tries to correct them. You can feel it in a room, structure straining against spin. The interpreter rubbed his temple. Apologies, he said, and in Mandarin to the delegation, offered a clumsy reassurance that only unsettled the phrasing more. He mispronounced tengxiao, amortization, turning the second tone into a fourth. It changed the color of the word the way bitter changes tea. Alana's chest cinched. She remembered Lin teaching her tones with chopsticks on a dorm desk. Tan 1 Zia 01 light, sliding like skates on ice. Lin had laughed. Don't stomp it. She could fix this in 10 seconds. She could destroy her job in 5. Charles leaned forward, finally catching a whiff of something off. Is there a problem? He asked, his smile thinning. Miss Zhang glanced at her colleagues, then laid down her pen with ceremonial care. You have combined a cash-based measure with an accrual risk, she said. You are asking us to sign a valuation that will, once retroactive indemnity is triggered, punish us for your accounting choice. That is not a partnership. That is a trap. Trap. The word cut the tablecloth. All heads turned to legal. The counsel, a man with a white pocket square that matched his knuckles, cleared his throat. We will of course ensure the language reflects EBIT to post-close. Miss Zhang raised a palm. The draft before us says EBIT 3 times. Legal blanched. The interpreter mumbled a partial translation, then coughed. The cough didn't stop. His face flushed a worrying shade. He grabbed for his water mist, and the glass tipped, water skating across the lacquered table toward a stack of signed pre-approvals. Alana moved before she thought. Tray in left hand, towel in right, she caught the glass, absorbed the spill, and rotated the tray under the paper like a shield. The water hit hammered silver with a soft hiss. Not a drop touched the approvals. Heads turned. For a fraction of a second, the room saw her hands before it remembered her uniform. Thank you, Miss Zhang said in English, meeting Alana's eyes. Respect, not surprise. Charles barely glanced over. "Can someone bring the man a fresh glass?" he said, like the interpreter had tripped over scenery in his play. Then to the delegates, "Let's keep this moving." But the moving had already changed direction. The interpreter coughed again, harder this time, and muttered, "Sorry, I need a minute," rising unsteadily from his chair. Panic flashed across Kira's face, across Legal's calculation, across the junior analyst, something uglier, blame looking for a body. 5-minute recess, Legal announced quickly, eager to regroup. "We'll reconvene with a corrected emphasis." "Emphasis is not the error," Miss Zhang said. Alana stepped back, tray against her hip like a shield, towel folded with the precision of a theorem. The spill had left a faint ring on the silver, a pale crescent where water had argued with metal and lost. Balance held for now. The U.S. investors began to murmur. Words like optics and fallback and materiality fluttered around like moths chasing a bulb. The junior analyst checked his phone, typed something, then looked up and caught Alana watching him. He lifted his chin. "You," he said under his breath as she passed, "don't wander near their side again." She paused, almost smiled. "I'm carrying the room," she said softly. "Every side is mine for now," he scoffed. "Cute." She moved on, but the sentence hung between them like a wire. At the doorway, Kira intercepted her, voice sugar over steel. "Stay in the service corridor until they call for refreshments." Alana held up the damp towel. "I need to replace this." "Do it, then wait. No detours." Kira's eyes flicked to the delegation. "And don't play translator, we have one." Had one. The interpreter had just staggered toward the hall, leaning on a credenza as if language were a heavy suitcase. Alana nodded, slipped through the side door, and let it swing shut on the boardroom buzz. In the service corridor, the hum of building life returned, vents rushing, ice machine rattling, a dishwasher's steady heartbeat. She wrung the towel over a sink, watching water stream in a straight, unbroken line. If she crossed back in now, past her assigned orbit, she'd be risking more than a warning. She knew exactly how this script went for people like her. She'd watched it end badly at smaller scales. Title versus truth. Title usually won the first round. But the deal wasn't math anymore. It was physics. Momentum misdirected. She could feel the vector and the friction, the torque of one wrong acronym twisting into a legal lever. She dried her hands, reached for a fresh towel, and stared at the tray propped against the wall. In the boardroom, it marked her service. Out here, it looked like something else, a round, reflective plane, levelness made visible. She set the tray on her fingertips and found center. The metal steadied as if deciding to trust her. If that happened to you, the thought rose, uninvited, what would you do? Wait for permission or move before the whole thing tips? She lowered the tray, squared her shoulders, and stepped back toward the door, not to interrupt, not to grandstand, but to be what the room actually needed, the person carrying balance when everyone else carried ego. Her palm met the push bar. On the other side, the recess was already ending. Voices arranged themselves into battle lines. Legal cleared his throat for a revised emphasis. Charles rehearsed a brighter smile. Miss Zhang's pen hovered still. Alana took one breath, counted to 5, and pressed the door open. The recess ended with the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of papers. Investors reassembled, faces taut with forced composure. Charles, ever the showman, rose to reclaim the room. "Small hiccup," he said, palms open like a magician about to reveal an illusion. "But our fundamentals remain unshakable. Let's proceed." The interpreter had not returned. His empty chair sat like a warning no one wanted to name. Alana edged along the wall with her tray, quiet, deliberate. But inside her, numbers and characters thundered. She could feel the misstep circling like a predator. The junior analyst filled the gap, his voice quick and defensive. "We've accounted for all depreciation in side models. EBIT is sufficient shorthand." Miss Zhang arched an eyebrow. "Shorthand collapses meaning." Her words sliced cleaner than a gavel. Alana's hand trembled once on the tray, then steadied. She stepped forward, not into the spotlight, but just close enough to the junior analyst. She placed a fresh glass of water by his hand, and as she did, slid a folded napkin beside it. Ink pressed through faintly. EBITDA not equal to EBIT. He glanced down, smirked, and whispered without looking at her, "Cute trick, stick to pouring." Her throat went dry. She wanted to say it aloud, wanted the syllables of Mandarin to roll sharp and clear across the table, but the weight of uniform and title pressed her down. Charles clapped once, commanding attention. We're moving to signature stage. Any further objections? Silence. Heavy, false, dangerous. The delegation hesitated. Miss Zhang tapped her pen 3 times, then folded her arms. Objection, she said finally. This is not mathematics. This is misrepresentation. A ripple of unease coursed through the American side. Legal coughed, adjusted glasses. We will clarify an addenda. No. Miss Zhang's voice cracked the air like a whip. We don't sign mistakes, then clarify later. The tray in Alana's hands tilted again. She caught it reflexively. Balance, always balance. Her notebook burned in her pocket. The formulas inside weren't theory. They were lifelines. She could almost hear her professor's voice. If you let a lie calcify, it becomes law. She took one careful breath, leaned slightly toward the analyst again, and whispered in Mandarin just for him. Nai de jishi budui. Taman hui tuichu. Your explanation is wrong. They will walk away. He froze, eyes darting to her. Then he scowled, shook his head, and whispered back, You don't exist here. The words struck harder than they should have. Invisible. That was what she was supposed to be, but invisibility didn't erase truth. The Chinese delegates whispered among themselves now, phrases Alana caught every other beat. Risk, unfair, trap clause, dangerous precedent. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't posturing anymore. They were preparing to stand. Charles forced another smile, but it looked brittle. Gentlemen, ladies, shall we toast before the ink dries? The tray weighed heavy in her arms. She poured champagne again, glass by glass, hand steady while her heart thundered. Each bubble rose like a countdown. She reached Miss Zhang last. The delegate lifted her flute, but before sipping she looked directly at Alana and said in Mandarin, measured and deliberate, Nai ting dong lama, did you understand? Alana's breath caught. The room waited. Yes, she whispered, voice barely audible. Charles glanced at her, dismissing it as service chatter. He didn't hear the depth of what had just passed between the two women. But Miss Zhang did. She held Alana's gaze for a second longer, then set her glass down untouched. The table fractured into uneasy murmurs. Papers shifted. Legal conferred in hushed panic. And Alana stepped back into shadow, her tray gleaming like a quiet shield. She had tried to give them the fix. She had tried to be heard, but the room had chosen arrogance over accuracy. For now, the recess had injected caffeine into everyone's nerves and sand into their gears. When the door sealed again, the room looked the same, but nothing sat quite level. Pens didn't lie flat. Smiles had corners. Even the whiteboard seemed to lean. Charles lifted his flute. To partnerships that survive translation, he said, forcing cheer. No one drank. Alana felt the imbalance first. The tray in her hands, faithful circle of steel, picked up the room's tremor and fed it back into her wrists. She shifted a hair's breadth, the way a tightrope walker angles a pole against a gust. The wobble quieted, not gone, waiting. Legal tried the soft landing. We propose a side letter clarifying EBITDA, post-close, post-audit. Miss Zhang didn't bother hiding her sigh. Side letters are for hospitality baskets, not value. A few chuckles died mid-throat on the American side. The junior analyst straightened his tie, eager to reclaim ground. Look, the delta between EBIT and EBITDA is marginal in this case. Show it, Miss Zhang said. He blinked. Excuse me. Show the delta. On paper. Now. The request hung there like a scalpel. He glanced at Charles, who nodded with the indulgence of a man confident in his own fiction. The analyst flipped to a blank sheet and began a flourish of numbers, fast, performative, like a pianist who thinks speed equals skill. Alana watched his pen hopscotch past depreciation, skip amortization, then tuck retroactive indemnity into a footnote as if danger could be miniaturized. She stepped closer under the pretext of filling waters. The tray dipped again. She steadied. Alana, Kira hissed from the doorway, voice pitched low enough to cut. You're hovering. I'm serving, she breathed back. Serve the air from 10 feet away. Alana retreated 2 steps. The junior analyst finished with a triumphant swipe, then spun the paper around with the drama of a reveal. See, negligible. Miss Zhang looked once, then twice. You modeled depreciation at 0, the analyst's grin thinned, for simplicity in this demonstration. Your demonstration, she said, demonstrates nothing. Heat moved through the table, the particular heat that rises when a bluff is seen. The CFO, who had remained in weathered silence, leaned forward at last. If EBITDA is the intended basis, he said evenly, we amend the text and recirculate. We lose a day, not the deal. A day, Charles echoed, hunting the frame that saved face. Yes, sensible. Legal jumped at the rope. We'll have the interpreter align the Mandarin then. The interpreter is ill, Miss Zhang said, and his last phrases did not inspire trust. Everyone pretended they hadn't noticed. Everyone failed. Kira's eyes drilled into Alana from across the room as if mere sight could pull her backward. Alana's palm warmed against the tray's underside. She wanted to set it down in the center of the table like a gong and say, "This is balance. Listen to how it rings when you hit truth." Instead, she lifted a single flute, polished a water ring from the lacquer and placed the glass back at perfect right angles to the folder's edge. Tiny corrections. Invisible math. Charles pivoted to charm the delegates. "Miss Zhang, my team is world-class. Any confusion is a hiccup, not a harbinger. We all want the same thing." "Do we?" she asked, and the way she said it made want sound like a weapon. The junior analyst tried again, this time defensive. "EBITDA will actually make your position riskier when the indemnity clause retroacts," Alana swallowed. There it was, the lever jammed under the floor. Miss Zhang angled her head. "Explain." He launched into quick English, then slowed when he realized he'd run out of understanding midway through a sentence. He looked to Legal for rescue. Legal looked to words and found none. The interpreter's chair sat empty. Alana's fingers tightened around the tray. She imagined writing Zishui Zhejiu Jai Tang Xiao Qian Luran in the condensation of a chilled carafe. Imagined characters blossoming one by one. Breath, Zai, tax Shui. Depreciation, Zhejiu. Amortization, Tang Xiao. Words that, placed correctly, stop empires from walking off cliffs. "Enough," Miss Zhang said. She stood, and when she did, the China side rose fractionally with her, a tide about to turn. "We will not sign a document that confuses measures, embeds a trap, and asks us to trust repair after the fact." The American investors murmured in discomfort. Share price headlines dead on arrival. Charles lifted both palms. "Please, sit, we are close." "We were close," she said, "before you insisted EBIT equals EBITDA and called it interchangeable." The wobble rolled through the tray, a slow wave from outer edge to center. Alana adjusted until the metal went still. She felt the room searching for the same stillness and failing. Kira appeared at her shoulder. "You're done in here." Alana kept her eyes on the table. "They haven't signed. You did your part. There's a birthday upstairs." "A crisis here," Alana said, quiet as steam. "Will spill upstairs in 10 minutes. Kira smiled with all her teeth. "Then it'll find someone in a nicer dress." She steered the tray toward the door with 2 fingers on its rim. The touch was light and absolute. Alana could have resisted. She didn't. She let herself drift, the way riverboats let currents have the first word. As the door neared, she looked once at Miss Zhang. The delegate looked back, not with pity, but with a kind of inventory. She was counting who in this room could actually hear. The door took Alana like an elevator takes a floor. The service corridor met her with metal, hum, and air cool enough to set thought into sharp relief. She set the tray on a narrow prep table and watched it. The circle settled, gleamed back a howl of fluorescence, and showed her face as a convex curve. Balance, she thought, is something you keep until the job asks for something rougher than balance. Sometimes the only way to steady a room is to shake it first. Her phone buzzed, LIN across the screen, the name a door she hadn't opened in months. 2 words, Nai Zai Ma. "You there?" She stared, thumb hovering, then typed back, "Zai. Jelly Yiki Du Quol. Here everything is wrong." The 3 dots pulsed. "Shuo Zhengwen J Taimen Ting. Say it to them in Chinese. Wo Hui Bei Kaichu, I'll be fired." A beat. "Na Ju Rang Taimen Zion Ting. Then let them hear first." Alana closed her eyes. It came back. Winter library light, thermoses of tea, Lin tapping a pen on a margin note. Correct the noun, and the verb becomes honest. Correct the measure, and the money becomes honest. The last thing Lin had said before graduating, "Don't let rooms turn you into a ghost." The door cracked behind her. The junior analyst slipped into the corridor, scanning for witnesses. He found Alana, relief flooding his face before he could hide it. "Hey," he said in a new tone, confidential, almost friendly. Can you, give me the correct Mandarin for EBITDA? Just so I can off the record, she studied him. The rim of the tray had left a pale crescent on her palm, a small moon of service. You had it on a napkin, she said. He colored. Look, I didn't realize they'd be this. He flapped a hand, meaning precise, unintimidated female. Serious, she offered. He grimaced. Just what's the phrase? She held his stare a heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. Then she said it clean and unhurried. Zishui jeju jai tengxiao qian luran. He repeated, mangled the tones, winced. Can you write it? She took her notebook out, turned to a clean page, and wrote the characters in a clear block hand Lin would have approved. Underneath, she drew the equation EBITDA equals EBIT plus D plus, and circled it twice. Then she paused, pen hovering, and added a second circle around Juisu Xing Peichang, retroactive indemnity, and an arrow pointing to Fengxian, risk. She tore the page free and held it. He reached for it. She didn't let go. Say it right, she said, or don't say it at all. He nodded too quickly, the way people nod when they don't understand but want permission anyway. She let the page go. Thanks, he blurted, already pivoting back to the door. I'll fix it. He wouldn't. He would sprinkle the words like salt and hope flavor-covered structure, but he had confirmed something better than his promise. The room wanted a fix without a reckoning, which meant the reckoning would have to arrive wearing an apron. Alana picked up the tray. It felt lighter, as if decision displaced ounces. She took one step toward the door, stopped, turned back to the prep table, set the tray down, and flipped it over so the underside faced up. The hammering had left a shallow ring where the spill had hissed. The ring caught the corridor's light like an eclipse. She drummed 2 fingertips against the metal. It hummed, a low, steady tone, not unlike breath held on a count of 5. She could walk away. She could let arrogance collect its due. She could make rent this month and swallow regret like a vitamin, or she could walk back in and be the correction the room refused to name. Her phone buzzed again. Lin, sometimes justice needs a voice before it gets a policy. Alana smiled without showing teeth. She slid the phone away, righted the tray, and squared her shoulders. If that happened to you, if the balance you were carrying began to shake, would you keep your hand steady or dare to set the whole thing down? She pressed the bar and re-entered the room. The wobble met her at once. The analyst, back in his seat, was butchering tones at a gallop, waving her handwriting like a talisman. Miss Zhang's expression didn't move. She waited for comprehension like a clock waits for the hour. Charles stared at the page as if the characters might confess to being decorative. Alana stepped to the table, placed the tray in the only truly empty space left, and spoke gently in flawless Mandarin that filled the cracks like gold. Ta nian quol, naiman yao de bushi ebit, naiman yao de shi ebita. Silence, then the smallest string snap of surprise. Balance, at last, began to tip the right way. The words she spoke in Mandarin still vibrated in the silence. What you need is EBITDA, not EBIT. For the first time all night, the room froze, not with arrogance but with recognition. Miss Zhang's eyes widened just slightly. The Chinese delegates murmured to one another, their tones shifting from suspicion to surprise. Alana held the tray steady, every glass gleaming under the chandelier. The weight had transformed, no longer burden but anchor. Then Charles laughed, loud, dismissive. Too quick. What the hell are you doing? His voice cracked like a whip across the polished table. Who do you think you are, lecturing in Mandarin during my deal? The spell broke. The American investors leaned back in their chairs. Some chuckled, others frowned. Legal adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat as if to restore hierarchy with a cough. Kira's heels clacked across the floor. She swooped in, grabbed Alana's elbow, and hissed, "Out, now." The tray rattled. Alana steadied it again, her voice calm. "I just corrected a fatal misstatement." Charles slammed a hand against the table. "You serve drinks, that's your station, stay in it." Her pulse raced, but her face stayed composed. "I studied finance and Mandarin. The distinction matters." The junior analyst smirked, ready to deliver the coup de grace. "You studied? Where, you tube?" Laughter rippled. Thin, ugly laughter. The Chinese delegates did not laugh. Miss Zhang, in particular, studied Alana with the same assessing look as before, but she said nothing. Not yet. Kira pulled harder at Alana's elbow. You're suspended, effective immediately. Go. Gasps fluttered through the staff at the back wall. Suspended for speaking truth. The tray in her hands wobbled violently now, glasses threatening to topple. She pressed her palm to the center, forcing stillness. Her chest burned with the effort of holding everything steady, her job, her dignity, her truth. The silence stretched until Charles filled it with his performance. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. Let's get back on track. This will be resolved. He gestured for legal to continue. The room's surface order returned, pens moving, papers shifting, signatures gathering momentum. But the undercurrent had changed. The Chinese delegates sat stiff, their expressions unreadable. They had heard her. They had understood, but they let the Americans barrel forward into error, because arrogance does not deserve rescue. Alana stood by the door now, Kira hovering like a guard. Her notebook felt hot in her pocket, her throat aching with all the words unsaid. She thought of Lynn's last message, then let them hear first. They had heard, and they had chosen dismissal. Her suspension meant nothing compared to what was coming, the deal itself unraveling under the weight of its own false math. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the humiliation burn clean. This was the false defeat, the moment where power pretended to win, but truth had already been spoken aloud. And once spoken, truth has a way of waiting. The word EBITDA, spoken clean and whole, hung in the air like a tuning fork. It kept ringing even as pride tried to drown it. Miss Zhang rose first. No rustle of fabric, no theatrics, just a woman standing with a pen that had already decided the future. "We will not sign," she said in English precise as a metronome. "Not with this formula." A dozen American faces pinched at once. Charles forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's not overreact. We can tidy language post-close." "No," Miss Zhang said. Then turning, she addressed Alana directly in Mandarin. "Can you make the problem clear?" Kira stepped between them, hand raised like a stop sign. "She's staff. She's been suspended." Silence. The kind that measures people. Miss Zhang didn't blink. "She is the only one who said the word we needed." Charles glanced around, found no rescue, and gave a strangled laugh. "Fine. 2 minutes. Make it quick." He flung a palm at the whiteboard like tossing a bone. Alana set the tray down. The silver rang softly against the lacquer, one pure note in a discordant room. She moved to the board with a composure she did not entirely feel, picked up the marker, and before writing inclined her head to the Chinese side. "Shillila. Excuse my boldness." Her handwriting was deliberate, upright, unhurried. She underlined the Mandarin sequence, the 4 characters that had been mangled all night. Then, beside it, she wrote 2 neat boxes and a thin arrow. She capped the marker. "In English first," she said, voice clear. "EBIT excludes depreciation and amortization. Tie indemnity to EBIT, and every necessary non-cash charge you record post-close makes you look weaker. You will pay for accounting entries that do not reflect cash loss. That is not risk-sharing, that is a hidden tax." Legal shifted in their seats. A throat was cleared. No one interrupted. "In Mandarin," Alana continued, turning slightly toward the delegation, her tones balanced like porcelain on a tray. "Ruguo ba juisu zing pei chang he zishui qian luran bangding, mei feng hui yinwei jeju he tang xiao air bei changfu shengfa. Yingai yang zishui jeju jai tang xiao qian luran. Ji kai gongping, ki jixing, I fu he naiman de yidu." If you bind retroactive indemnity to EBIT, the buyer is penalized twice for depreciation and amortization. The correct base is EBITDA. That is fair, enforceable, and consistent with your stated intent. The room absorbed the translation the way dry ground drinks first rain. She turned back to the Americans. "You've been telling them you want strength measured. EBITDA is the strength measure for this structure. It neutralizes non-cash charges, so indemnity tracks real performance, not optics." The junior analyst's mouth opened, then closed. The CFO pen stopped tapping. Alana drew one final line. She placed the marker down carefully, like setting a scalpel on a tray. "Do that," she said softly, "and you sign something honest." No one breathed. Then Miss Zhang did something small and seismic. She bowed her head the slightest degree. "Thank you," she said in English to the Americans, in Mandarin to Alana. Thanks. Charles paled, then colored. He managed a laugh that sounded like glass in a garbage disposal. Neat lecture, he said. But our team, the CFO cut in, voice newly steady, just heard the only coherent path to close. Legal looked at one another as if deciding which of them would volunteer to be competent. We can redraft, one murmured. Now, Miss Zhang said. Not a request. Charles rounded on Alana, searching for a better insult and finding none. You realize you just undermined your employer. Alana met his gaze without flinching. No, she said. I prevented you from undermining yourself. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The entire table heard it land. The interpreter's empty chair seemed to watch the proceedings like a cautionary tale. Alana glanced at the tray still resting on the lacquer, the faint water ring gleaming on its underside like a halo that had earned itself. Balance had moved from her palms to the room. Miss Zhang addressed her colleagues in Mandarin, crisp and cool. Ta Jiang de Wangquan Zhenk. Women Qi Jixu, Dan Bixu and Ta Shuo de Gai. She is completely correct. We can proceed, but only with her changes. Literal goosebumps when she spoke. On the American side, something unclenched, numbers realigned in a dozen quiet minds. Arrogance, cornered, began to bargain with accuracy. Charles sank into his chair. Fine, he said at last, eyes on legal. Fix the wording. Not wording, Miss Zhang replied. Meaning. The junior analyst, chastened, slid the notebook page Alana had given him back across the table toward her, an awkward tribute he didn't know how to make. She didn't pick it up. Some gifts belonged to the air once spoken. Kira, frozen mid-corridor, looked like someone had quietly rearranged gravity without her consent. Alana, she said under her breath, a warning that arrived late to its own party. But it was Miss Zhang who set the terms now. We would like her to remain, she said, nodding at Alana, to confirm both languages match. Charles exhaled through his nose. She doesn't work in legal. She works in reality, Miss Zhang said, which is what contracts must join eventually. Legal pushed a draft toward Alana, hands reluctant. If you wouldn't mind highlighting the sections to amend in Mandarin. Alana glanced to Kira. The manager's jaw worked, but no order came. Suspended or not, the room had just rewritten her access. She lifted her tray gently off the core of the table, an old habit of removing obstacles, and set it aside like a crown she no longer needed. She took the draft and a pen. Her notes were surgical, each instance of EBIT circled, each paired Mandarin line corrected, a margin arrow knitting the two languages into one meaning. She struck through a stray phrase that softened Juisu Xing Peichong into something it wasn't. She replaced it with clarity. No more trapdoors disguised as rugs. When she finished, she slid the pages to legal, then to Miss Zhang, then to the CFO. Each paused, read, and one by one nodded. Miss Zhang looked up. With these changes, we can sign. The reversal wasn't loud. It was a room coming to level. It was the sharp click of a scale finding zero. Somewhere far below them, the building's HVAC exhaled as if the floors themselves approved of the correction. Charles stared at the board, at the corrected lines, at the woman he'd tried to push out of the room where his power lived. He did the math silently. The deal would live because she had refused to let it die politely. He didn't thank her, not yet. Pride is always the last metric to adjust, but his signature hand stopped shaking. Alana stepped back, palms suddenly light without the tray. The silver circle waited on the sideboard, no longer the emblem of service alone, but of balance delivered. It had carried glasses. Tonight it had also carried a room. The corrected draft lay on the table like a mirror no one dared avoid. The ink was still wet, the truth still sharp. Miss Zhang signed first. She didn't hesitate. The sound of her pen on paper was deliberate, ceremonial. When she finished, she rose slightly and bowed her head toward Alana. It was not theatrical, it was recognition. Nai de Fanny Geo women. Your translation saved us. The other delegates echoed her, some in Mandarin, some in English. Thank you. For the first time, the acknowledgement wasn't whispered in corners. It was spoken into the air of the boardroom itself. On the American side, silence pressed against pride. The CFO cleared his throat, then, slowly, carefully, turned to Alana. If you hadn't spoken, we would have signed a loaded weapon. Charles tried to cut in to laugh it off, but even his investors weren't laughing anymore. One leaned forward, nodding toward Alana. She saw it before any of us. Respect that. Respect. The word felt heavier than champagne, heavier than signatures. Kira shifted at the edge of the room, caught between roles. A manager with orders. A witness to truth. Her face betrayed something unspoken. She had never expected Alana's correction to ripple this far. The symbolic tray still rested on the sideboard. Alone, it gleamed like a disk of captured light. Its surface reflected a different room now, not chaos, not wobble, but balance reclaimed. Alana stepped toward it, lifted it once more, and found that the weight had changed. It no longer trembled in her hands. It steadied her instead. She set it down in the center of the table, this time not as a servant, but as a witness. "Balance," she said softly. "That's all I carried." The room went quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't dismissal, it was listening. Miss Zhang surprised everyone next. She extended her hand across the table, not to Charles, not to legal, to Alana. Alana hesitated, then placed her hand gently in the delegate's. Miss Zhang clasped it firmly. "Would you consider consulting with us?" she asked in English. "Your perspective, unseen but precise, is what saved this deal." The shock was audible. Papers rustled. A glass clicked too hard against the table. Charles sputtered. She pours drinks." Miss Zhang's gaze was unflinching. "She also prevented $100 million error. Which of those jobs mattered more tonight?" Literal goosebumps when she spoke. Alana didn't answer immediately. She looked at the tray, at the notebook in her apron, at the contract that no longer carried poison. She thought of Lynn's message, then let them hear first. They had heard, and they had bowed. This was catharsis, not applause but clarity, not pity but respect. She let her breath steady and replied, "I'll consider it." And for once, no one told her she was out of place. By morning, the city had turned last night's tension into headlines with teethless verbs, clarified, amended, aligned, as if the deal had simply straightened its collar. No mention of the woman with the tray. That was fine. The people who needed to know knew. At 8:12 a.m., Alana stood in a glass-walled conference room that used to be off-limits. No silver circle in her hands now, just her small notebook and a pen that clicked once, the sound of a beginning. Charles arrived with legal and the CFO. HR followed, tight-shouldered, ready to manage fallout. On the screen, Miss Zhang and her team joined by video from Shanghai, a clean grid of calm faces. "Before we start," the CFO said, "I want it on record without Miss Brooks." He used her last name for the first time. This deal would have signed the wrong math. A faint cough from legal, a grudging nod from HR. Charles drummed his fingers, pride and gratitude wrestling in his knuckles. "Duly noted," he said. Miss Zhang smiled a millimeter. "We also have something to propose," she said, then glanced at Alana. "Or rather, someone else does." All eyes turned. Alana's pulse tapped a quiet metronome in her throat. She lifted the notebook and spoke with the same steady cadence she'd used on the whiteboard. "Last night didn't happen because people lacked intelligence," she began. "It happened because our system doesn't know where intelligence lives." She wrote a title on the room's new board, Hidden Talents Initiative. Find the skills you aren't asking for beneath it. She listed bullet points, small, precise levers, staff skills registry, a voluntary database where every employee can list languages, credentials, and second careers. Weighted search, not a PDF graveyard. 2-hour tap. Any team facing a cross-border, technical, or cultural issue must spend 2 hours consulting the registry before calling outside vendors. Translator verification loop. Legal language in all languages must be checked by 2 distinct readers. One internal, one external, sign-off captured in the contract metadata. Meeting access protocol. For high-stakes sessions, service staff assigned to the room may opt in as silent observers with a green card. If a translation or safety issue arises, they're empowered to speak. Recognition ledger, not a plaque. A living log that attributes contributions by name, not title, and allocates a small bonus pool accordingly. She capped the marker, breath even. "If last night repeats," she said, "it won't be because we didn't have the people. It'll be because we refuse to see them." Silence, but the right kind, consideration, not condescension. HR recovered first. The registry sounds good, she managed. We've tried things like that. You tried forms no one reads, Alana replied, gentler than the sentence could have been. Make it searchable. Put it in the onboarding. Ask managers to query it in their quarterly reviews. Make not using it a red flag. Legal raised a cautionary finger. Meeting access for service staff introduces. Reality, Miss Zhang said, cutting in. It introduces reality. Charles exhaled through his nose, looked at the floor, then up again. All right, he said, pilot it. 90 days. CFO HR Miss Brooks design it. Legal draft the translator loop. He turned to Alana fully now, swallowing what tasted like humility. And I want you here, full-time, strategy liaison. The word liaison slid across the table like an expensive pen. It gleamed. It also missed. Alana let it rest between them. I'd like to finish my degree, she said. Evenings. Mornings if I can afford it. She glanced at the board, at her own handwriting folded into company history. And I'd rather build the system than collect the title. The CFO smiled. Tuition reimbursement exists for a reason. Consider it accelerated. HR scribbled. Legal nodded, already imagining policy copy. Charles's shoulders dropped an inch in something close to relief. Build it, he said. On the screen, Miss Zhang's team gave a small round of applause. No show, just respect measured out like discipline. We'll adopt the same registry across our portfolio, she added. Send us your schema. Alana wrote schema beside a box on the board and felt, absurdly, like she just named a door. They spent an hour in clean work, converting ideas into architecture, friction points into rules. The 2-hour tap became a calendar flag, the recognition ledger a quarterly email with 3 lines of plain language. Who helped? What did they do? Pay it forward. No confetti, no speeches, just receipts. When the meeting broke, Charles lingered. He looked at the board, then at Alana. You embarrassed me last night, he said, unblinking. And you saved me, a beat. Both can be true. They are, she said, but I didn't say it to embarrass you. I know. He meant it. He reached toward the table where her tray had been last night and stopped, fingers curling around empty air. We'll need a symbol for the rollout, he said. Something staff recognize as theirs. It already exists, Alana said. She walked him down the hall to the service pantry. The silver tray leaned where she'd left it after the last pour, ordinary metal, scratched from a decade of nights. She lifted it, and the weight found its old home just below her left palm. It taught me balance, she said, and that small adjustments prevent big falls. Charles tried a clumsy smile. May I? She placed it in his hands. He bobbled it, then found the center a little off to the left, the way you only discover by feel. For a second, he was a man holding a lesson. He handed it back, palms warmer than he expected. Put it in the lobby, he said. Tell the story. Not yet, Alana answered. Let the policy speak first, he nodded. It was, for him, a radical act of restraint. The next weeks turned the idea into muscle memory. HR built a clean intake with big text, prompts, no corporate riddles. And Diego, the espresso magician, stayed late to help translate the page into Spanish and Portuguese. The registry bloomed. Dishwashers listed Swahili, bartenders listed ASL. A night porter listed a decade of paramedic work. A pastry chef uploaded code contributions to an open-source data viz library. The feed looked like a city introducing itself to itself. The first time a team used the 2-hour tap, it took 14 minutes to find a sous chef who'd grown up in Gwangju and could explain a supplier's note that had stumped procurement for 3 days. The ledger logged the save. A small bonus followed. Procurement sent cake downstairs. Someone posted a photo, a rectangle of icing with Zia piped in shaky sugar. It was funny and perfect. Legal cursed the translator loop for a week, then blessed it on the 8th day when a French rider and its Vietnamese sibling disagreed by exactly one word that would have cost 7 figures in penalties. The loop caught it. The loop paid for itself. Kira, who'd once told Alana to stay 10 feet from the air, printed the registry's green observer cards and distributed them with a face that had learned something. At the next cross-border call, A janitor lifted a card and quietly asked why the Indonesian draft called a deposit what every banker in the room knew was a pledge. The room listened. The card worked. Diego taped a tiny sign above the service elevator, "Ask the floor. It knows." Alana slept 4 hours a night and didn't feel tired. She sat in evening classes with a backpack that smelled like coffee and whiteboard cleaner, taking notes as a professor talked about information asymmetry. She smiled. She'd lived the chapter. On weekends, she wrote the policy wiki in the calm, precise tone of someone building a life raft that also happened to be a bridge. Sometimes she still worked a shift. Not for money, not for optics. For the practice of balance. She'd carry the tray through a smaller room, feel gravity in her palm, and remember what it had taught her, make the correction before the spill. It kept her honest. It kept the story from hardening into self-congratulation. The day the first quarterly recognition ledger went out, her name appeared sixth after a dishwasher, a sous chef, a night porter, a receptionist, and a line cook. She laughed. It felt right. The hierarchy had been politely rearranged by evidence. She forwarded the email to Lynn with a single line. Sometimes justice arrives without applause. Lynn replied with a picture of a Beijing law library, and Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. One day becomes today. Late that afternoon, Miss Zhang's assistant sent a short note. Your registry schema is now standard across 3 subsidiaries. We are naming it the Brooks Index internally. We hope that's acceptable. Alana stared at the screen until the words settled into the part of her that didn't need headlines. Acceptable sounded exactly right. She closed her laptop, took the tray down from its hook, and polished the faint ring the water had left months ago. It didn't disappear. It gleamed. Not a stain, an outline of where chaos had tried to land and didn't. She turned the tray over, held the underside to the light, and saw her face curve in the metal's convex honesty. A mirror that refuses to flatter is the best teacher. Then she carried the tray down the corridor toward the lobby, not to display it, not yet, but to measure where it might live when the system could speak for itself. The building breathed around her, steadier now. Somewhere on 12, a manager searched the registry and found a housekeeper who could read a Burmese customs slip. Somewhere on 5, a security guard learned the Mandarin for amortization. Somewhere in the basement, Diego piped Chinese letter in better icing. The tray balanced on her fingertips, light as proof. The contract was signed, the policy drafted, the registry live. The building pulsed with a quieter kind of order now, but for Alana, the story wasn't done until the symbol had completed its circle. One evening, weeks later, she lingered in the lobby after a late class. The glass doors spilled in the city's restless light. Security nodded her through. She walked to the center of the marble floor where the tray rested inside a new glass case. It wasn't polished to erasure. Every scratch and dent remained, each one a record of balance tested and found. A small placard beneath read, "The tray of balance used nightly in service." On the night of the $100 deal, it steadied the room. It reminds us, unseen hands can hold the center. Employees passed it daily, some glancing, some stopping. Once she'd been told to stay 10 feet from the air. Now her reminder stood at the heart of it. Miss Zhang visited on her next trip. She paused at the display, tracing the words with her eyes. "Balance," she said, softly enough that only Alana heard. "You carried more than glasses." Alana smiled. "I carried what I could hold, and made the rest of us steady." They stood together, 2 women who had seen arrogance collapse under the weight of its own shortcuts. Neither needed applause. The object spoke for them. That night, Alana sat in her apartment, notebook open. On the first page, she drew the tray, a circle with faint wobble lines radiating out, then settling. Beneath it she wrote, "Justice doesn't arrive loud. It arrives balanced." She closed the notebook, placed it beside her textbooks, and exhaled. Tomorrow she would mop a spill in the cafe, answer an email about registry schema, and draft a case study for class. Life would resume its small, unglamorous balances. That was fine. Legacy didn't need a stage. It needed a center. The tray stayed in the lobby, not as decoration, but as proof. New hires touched the glass before their first shift, the way athletes tap a banner before a game. Old staff nodded at it in passing, remembering nights when their own balance had saved a moment no one recorded. Alana walked by often. She didn't stop every time. Symbols don't need constant witnesses. They need permanence. She passed it once with Lynn at her side, both carrying coffee, both laughing about professors who graded too slow. Lynn stopped, stared, then looked at her. So this is the legacy. Alana shrugged, smiling. Just a tray. Not anymore, Lynn said. Sometimes justice arrives without applause. Sometimes it arrives as a tray, balanced, scratched, ordinary. Sometimes it arrives as the thing no one thought mattered, holding everything steady until truth had a chance to stand. Alana left the lobby, her footsteps light, her palms free. The tray stayed where it was, circle unbroken, story complete.